Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobsen. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building, it's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobsen, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BS and no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record
I thought
button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? Well, folks, we are here. This time we're in Bozeman, Montana.
We are.
For another episode of the Elk Talk Podcast
With Corey Jacobsen,
and Randy Newberg, brought to you by
the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And we're going to solve some really serious elk problems today.
Absolutely. Wait a minute. There are problems with elk?
Well, let me restate that.
We cause problems for elk.
Right. Last podcast, we went way too long. How did we end up at almost 2.5 hours in a podcast?
People are in for a real, what's the word? I can't even, I want to say treat, but that would have been way too sarcastic.
Yeah, well, some guy called me and he said, hey, if I knew I had to put in for vacation time to finish your podcast.
Well, I got a message from a guy that said listening to you two talk was like listening to two women from back east gossip.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know whether he was meaning that as a compliment or...
That'd be offensive to the women back east.
That's what I thought.
So I think what we ought to do, because we asked people for comments, right? And we got, I don't know if it's thousands. I got hundreds of comments.
Lots of emails and messages on Instagram. Yeah.
So people said that they wanted more consumable pieces.
Yep.
I don't know what to me, consumable means like I eat it.
Yeah.
But I think what they were talking about is they wanted shorter, maybe hour and 15-minute type pieces.
Yeah. A lot of the comments I got were, hey, I go to the gym and I spend an hour there. I want to be able to listen to a podcast on my way to the gym while I'm at the gym and be done, not have to go back and listen to half of one the next day. So that hour time frame seemed to be, a lot of people are just saying that's ideal. And if we can crank out more podcasts, instead of every 2 weeks, we can get it down to every week, then they're going to have more consumable, bite-sized pieces of you and I gossiping like women from back east.
There you go. So with that, folks, what you're going to hear on this podcast is we're going to finish up what would have took at least another hour. If we would have finished the last two mistakes on the prior podcast, we would have been there for 3.5 hours.
Because we dove into top 5 elk hunting mistakes that hunters make. You had your top 5, I had mine.
Yep.
And mine were a lot wordier. And so we have 2 of them left, if I remember it. Top 2.
Yeah, we got setups and calling mistakes.
Yeah.
But before we get to that part, we better take care of the business of
That's right.
telling people who makes this podcast possible. And in case they weren't listening in the prior podcast, I guess we probably ought to go through the list. We said who it was presented by.
Yep, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is the title sponsor of Elk Talk Podcast, and it's a good fit.
Yeah. Imagine that.
Yeah.
RMEF, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, title sponsors a podcast called Elk Talk.
Yeah.
RMEF.org, go there and become a member.
Absolutely.
Or a volunteer, or
and
both.
I say it in every episode, but if you're an elk hunter and not a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, I would just encourage you to look into what their mission is and consider being a member.
Yeah.
And what is their mission?
Their mission is ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage.
I mean, if you're an elk hunter, you have to fit in that box.
Yeah. I can't believe I remember. You really threw that one at me.
Yeah, I knew you remembered
that.
it.
Gosh. It's almost like my social security number I was rattling off there. But the other one is, did you get your care package from Gerber yet?
It showed up. So we left. I've been on the road for the last week.
Yeah.
It showed up the afternoon we left. So a week ago today.
Okay.
So it's sitting on my porch if no one's stolen it. Which where I live, the only person who would have stole it would have been the FedEx driver.
Really?
And we know how to get a hold of him.
Okay. You know him well.
I don't know him very well, but I know how to get a hold of him.
Okay. All right. So anyhow, Gerber sends me like a care package a week. I don't know if they think I'm losing knives. And Lauren is like, Randy, be giving these away. So I shouldn't have said that. Now
no kidding.
People are going to think, why aren't you giving knives away?
Yeah. What do we have to do to get ours?
I know. So anyhow, Gerber Gear makes amazing knives. I've been using them for a long time. They're Gerber Vital. They're Big Game Vital. If you are an elk hunter, you're going to want to have those in your pack. And then the other company that is, I guess you've been with them since forever. I mean,
I've been with every company forever, it seems like.
Sitka Gear.
Yeah.
So.
And right here in Bozeman, Montana.
Right here. We should have called them.
We should have went and done the podcast there.
What were we thinking?
Well, they don't have the guard dog.
Well, that's true. Yeah, folks, if you see a little white dog running through here, it's not animation. We're at my house, and my wife is taking care of elderly parents. So I'm on dog detail. I have a 15-year-old, completely deaf, mostly blind, incorrigible cockapoo that thinks Corey is the greatest guy around. But I wondered why she was so attracted to Corey. He's been camping all week. He reminded me that he hadn't showered, and so I think the dog feels maybe like there's some.
I didn't smell the dog.
Something foul. Yeah,
there's definitely my odor is high on the odor scale.
But anyhow, Sitka Gear.
Yeah, making incredidible technical clothing for hunters.
Yeah, you get your Apex.
I had some previously.
Yeah.
I've been hunting in it, and honestly, early season elk hunting, I can't even wait to try it because it's what it's made for.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
Yeah,
I've got mine downstairs, but I'm not going to get my first elk hunt. I'm not going to be elk hunting until September. Well, I leave here on the 4th. Be hanging out. Yeah, it's going to be like the 5th or 6th before I get into it.
I thought you were going to say later in September, and I was going to.
You'll have like 6 or 7 of them already stiffing on the ground by that time.
We'll hopefully have a couple anyway. We get to start August 25th this year in Oregon for Roosevelt.
Oh, yeah. You're going with the born and raised guy?
No, we couldn't figure our schedules out on that, so we're going with David Brinker.
Oh, Brinker's here playing his guitar this week.
He'll be at the Total Archery Challenge.
Former marketing guy at Sitka Gear. Huh. Well, anyhow, Sitka sponsors this podcast, makes amazing product. Go to your local retailer, try it on, check it out, buy some, and understand it's going to last you for years and years and years and years.
And the other thing, be sure that you're talking to somebody that knows the gear before you order it, because I get people that call and they're like, I just spent half of my paycheck on Sitka gear and I went elk hunting in it and I froze or I sweated the whole time, and they bought duck waders or something. So you have to get the gear that is tailored for your style of hunting, and it becomes a system, and it truly is a valuable piece of your elk hunting system.
Yeah. The layering and treating it like a system is that's the critical part. GoHunt.com. Right now, I mean, you and I use GoHunt a lot.
Oh, I just spent last week probably 3 hours on it. And you think, why in the middle of July is Corey spending time on GoHunt? It's more than just draw odds.
Yeah.
So much more info there.
Yeah. It's got harvest statistics. It's got moisture patterns. It's got so much information. And I know people hear me talk about it a lot. Well, right now, they can get a 30-day free trial of the Insider, kind of the behind the scenes, roll back the curtains.
It's the full, everything there.
And to get that, folks, you want to go to GoHunt.com with a / Elk Talk. One word, Elk Talk, and sign up for your 30-day free trial. And I can assure you, you're going to get a lot of value out of your 30 days. because it's free.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's kind of like that's almost like cheating. That's like getting what do they call it, a gateway drug. Letting you touch it and use it. After you use it, you're like, sign me up.
I was the same way. I was skeptical when they first, when I sat down I think it was at Vegas at the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation show several years ago when they first came out, and I was completely skeptical. They talked me into it, just showing me a couple of the features there, and I've been a member ever since. And there's so much value beyond just draw odds, which I think initially was their platform for launch was, we've got the most accurate draw odds, and they do, and you can see any state, how many points it takes to draw any tag, but there's so much more value, even in over-the-counter type units. You can put in there, I want to draw a unit or go hunting with 0 points, and they'll show you what units are available, and then you can narrow it down from there on harvest success on basically any
public versus private land percentages. Yeah. We could spend this podcast talking about GoHunt. But go to GoHunt.com/Elk Talk and sign up.
Yep.
So I see you brought your pouch of stuff here. One of the other partners we have is Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls.
Yes.
And in there, is this like the Corey Jacobsen Skunk Works lab here? Like
these are the calls that I always keep protected.
Really?
No one gets always to see on them. My person. Yeah.
I don't know, folks. That sounds a little suspicious to me.
Is it too early to mention we might be working on something new?
No.
Okay. Well, I just mentioned it, so we're good.
Okay. Yeah.
So Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is a sponsor of Elk Talk Podcast and make great elk calls.
Yeah, and go to Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls and buy yours for this upcoming season and save 15% when you use the promo code Elk Talk.
Yep.
We're making this pretty easy.
I was just going to say, even somebody like you and I can remember the promo code.
Right.
Which if we can remember it sitting here, and Randy doesn't have notes this time, so if we can remember it, you can remember it.
That's a good way to say it. If I can remember, it's kind of like...
I said we.
Yeah, well, I know, but it's like the old Geico commercial, so simple even a caveman could do it. Well, if Randy can do it, anyone can do it. So, and last, we certainly don't want to forget about them, is Onyx. OnyxMaps.com is the website you would go to. We were just talking about it before we turned on the mic about how we use, right here, folks, this one. Oh, if you go to Elk Foundation headquarters, you see that? You get that little Team Elk thing that keeps your phone from sliding around, huh?
What's that? Oh, a little.
See that?
It's more than a sticker.
It's more than a sticker. It's rubber. Your phone won't slide. When you take a sharp corner, your phone doesn't slide across the dash of your truck.
So for those of you who aren't watching this on YouTube and you're listening, Randy has a little anti-sliding pad on the back of his cell phone case.
It says Team Elk.
It says Team Elk. It's really sharp looking, and it keeps it from sliding around.
Yeah, but I still have a lot of cracks on my screen.
Well, I've seen your truck after hunting season.
Yeah. Anyhow, Onyx, I'm the app guy now. And I would suggest everybody go out, get the app, use it, you'll have it on your smartphone, get it on your laptop or your desktop, laptop, whatever.
Syncs up. You put waypoints on one, they show up on the other.
Yeah.
We were in Glacier National Park this week. My 11-year-old was with me last night picking huckleberries, and of course it's grizzly country, and he was getting nervous, and he said, "Can you pull up that little map on your phone and see how far from camp we are?" So I was able to pull it up right there and show him we're only about 300 yards from camp. We're okay here.
Well, if you are into what we are, I think they are if they're listening, public land elk hunting, you need the Onyx system.
Yep.
And they can save 20% if they go to OnyxMaps.com.
No small discount. That's a huge 20%, discount.
Yeah. And you go there and you use promo code drum roll
Elk Talk.
Elk Talk. There you go. So there you have it, folks. 20% savings at Onyx, 15% savings at Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls, 30-day free trial at GoHunt. I mean, we just gave them more than their money's worth.
I was going to say, even if they aren't getting any value from anything we talk about, we're providing some value there.
Well, I'm pretty sure that they're not getting a lot of value from anything I'm talking about. But so let's get to your two mistakes. The two remaining mistakes that we didn't get to on the last podcast were setups and calling mistakes.
Yep.
Which do you prefer to go to first?
I think They go hand in hand.
Okay.
And if you have a bad setup and you have good calling, you're not going to be successful.
Okay.
And if you have a great setup, but you aren't on the page with calling, you aren't going to be successful. So I think they go hand in hand. That you need both of them. I think the setup comes before calling, so we can start there and kind of walk through some of the mistakes and then how to correct those mistakes.
Okay. So I'll tell you, this was Randy Newberg when he first started archery elk hunting. I'd hear an elk, I'd get 200 yards away, and I'd think I was going to call him in. And every once in a while, I'd stumble into one at 50 yards, and I'd think, well, I'm going to call him in. And I'd get behind a tree. Like, kind of hide and seek, like when you're a kid. I mean, I'm thinking about all the things I was doing wrong. It's like I wrote the book on how to do bad setups. I think
anyone who's elk hunted has at least a chapter in the book on how to mess up a setup.
Yeah. So when you do it, I mean, you've done it so many times. What's going through your mind when you're at that point where, all right, we got to get set up because this bull is coming?
Yep.
Is there something that instantly is the very first thing that goes through your mind?
Yeah, I think it's stepping back and thinking about the psychology of an elk.
Okay.
And an elk's a wild animal. We don't know how their brain works, but they're survivalists, no doubt. And when they come into a setup, no matter how good of an elk caller you are, no matter how deep in the rut they are, they're still thinking about surviving. And that setup has to at least make them feel like it's survivable. If there's so many things, we'll get into a lot of those, but that's probably the first thing. Where is the elk most likely to come in and feel safe? And he's not going to come through a big brush thicket. He's probably not going to walk across a wide open meadow. Those are things I look at initially and say, okay, he's not going to come there. He's not going to come here. Here are the 3 remaining areas he could come in. And which of those 3 is he going to feel most protected? And then in addition to that, which of those 3 am I going to be able to either fool his senses or overcome his senses?
So you made some really big assumptions of knowledge there.
Yeah.
Because when I look at the landscape, I'm not good enough to know, do I eliminate this or eliminate you? Because you said, okay, you eliminate this open spot, you eliminate this. That's just knowing the habits of elk that allows you to quickly make that assessment?
I wouldn't say necessarily. It definitely helps, but I think there's things that you can learn about the habits of elk without experience. Obviously, experience adds to that knowledge. But for instance, last year in Wyoming, we were doing the Land of the Free project with Born and Raised, and 1:00 in the afternoon, a bull bugles from his bed, which I love that scenario. We're above him, everything's good, except for the fact there's a wide open meadow, probably 200 or 300 yards across. And before we can do anything and react, that bull's standing on the edge of the meadow. And I thought, we're hosed. That bull is standing there. He's surveying up above. He's looking for something. There's no way at 1:00 in the afternoon with bright sunlight, he's going to step out into that meadow.
Yeah.
And he did. He walked right out into it, straight across, didn't even worry about the wind, came on a beeline right up the hill to us. And that's a gift. That does not happen. Do not count on that happening. But that goes contrary to my thinking.
Yeah.
My thinking is he's on the edge of that meadow. We've got the wind coming up to us, so we're good there. But in order for us to get around into the timber with him, we don't have a play. We have to sit back and just wait. There's nothing we can do in that situation without taking a really big risk that we're going to run him off. So, that one was a gift that broke the laws of elk hunting setups. But for the most part, if you are in a really thick area and you've got an open hillside that you're climbing up, the bull's got an open ridge he's on, but in between you there's a draw that's just thick with alders or some kind of tangled mess, that bull's probably not going to step down off of the ridge, come through that because he's making noise, he can't see. The only thing he's got then is his nose if he can get an approach. So if that's the case, I'm thinking if he's going to come in, he's going to have to go around that big patch of brush or that alder thicket, and he's going to want to use his nose exclusively. So if the wind's blowing uphill, I've got to set up above that. And so it's just all of those different aspects that go into his 3 senses, his sense of sight, his sense of sound, and his sense of smell. And I've got to make him comfortable, feel like he's able to use all those things. He's coming in, he's able to see where that sound's coming from. and not get nervous.
Yeah.
And at that point, when he can see where the sound's coming from, I'd better have had a shot as the shooter out there. For sound, as he's coming in, he's going to be stopping and listening. And so I'm going to want that caller back behind making noise, raking trees, breaking branches to hold his attention, make him feel like I know exactly where the danger is if that's danger. And now I can circle down below it and use my nose to see if it's danger. As the shooter out front, I'm set up to take advantage of that. So all of those senses come into play, and that's really how an elk stays alive, is through their senses. So as I'm picking that setup, I'm thinking about those three senses and making sure that as the shooter, set up out front, and I guess probably need to step back, definitely use the two-man setup, a shooter and a caller setup.
If at all possible.
Yeah, and we can talk on solo strategies here in a bit because I think that's important as well.
It is.
But basically use the same concept. You've got a shooter out in front that the elk doesn't know about and a caller back behind. And if it's a solo setup, you've just got to play both of those parts in that same way. He doesn't know you're the shooter out front, but he knows you're the caller and he knows where you're at behind. So we can get to that in more detail.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So a lot of times there are obstacles between you and the bull.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like you were saying, there's a deep spot with some alders, or maybe it's just he's comfortable because 80 yards over there's two little fingers that come off the ridge. You're on one and he's on the other. And do you have to let him say, all right, I'm comfortable on this little finger ridge, and you just have to move to some place where he's comfortable moving off there? Because I've had many times like that where he's just not going to move.
Right.
You're not going to get him to leave that little ridge, drop down in a 30-foot depression, and come up the other ridge.
And it's important, I think, at that point to understand why.
Why?
Why is he not going to come down any farther? He wants to come in. Their instinct is to come into the cow calls for breeding purposes or come into the bugle for fighting purposes. That's a natural instinct of an elk. And if they hang up or if they turn and leave, there is a reason for that. And I think understanding why before you get in that setup is important. So the scenario you mentioned, he gets on a ridge, he doesn't want to come down into the draw and up on the ridge that you are on. There's a couple of reasons. First off, he may be able to see from that other ridge where the calls are coming from.
Yeah.
And if he can see that location and not see an elk, instantly that danger mechanism is triggered. And he's thinking, okay, I hear an elk, but I don't see one, something's wrong. And I'm not going a step closer until I know that something's not wrong. And at that point, that's where they hang up. And it's usually that 80 to 120 yards, which is the crutch of most bow hunters, getting them that last distance.
Yeah.
So the caller's setup is just as important as the shooter's setup. You've got to be in a position where that bull has to come to a certain point, meaning inside the shooting lanes, before he can see where the calls might be coming from and get nervous. The other thing is if he drops down that hill, as he turns and comes back up, he's at a physical disadvantage. So as he's coming up the hill to your calls, he's going to be wary because he's going to think another bull that's out of his mind in the rut right now and wants to kill me is going to come barreling down the hill and have that physical advantage. So calling a bull straight up a hill can be more difficult. So getting on the same level can solve that. If you get on the same level as the elk, he's going to feel a lot more comfortable coming around where he doesn't feel like he's at a disadvantage physically.
Because I'm as you're talking, my mind is running through about 100 scenarios I've screwed up and can't get them to come from 90 or 80 or 100 or whatever.
There's always a reason.
Right. And I've done it in places where there's a lot of blowdown, and I can't go the place I want to go to try get them to come around the blowdown because the wind will be wrong.
Yep.
Is that just
there's a reason they're there?
Right.
And that's, their bedding areas are just like that. They bed in an area where they have the wind coming up the hill, so they're protected from below. And then there's a maze of brush or of blowdowns or a wide open hill where they can use their other sense to protect them.
So a situation like that, I know for sure I can't go around because the wind's going to mess me up. Sometimes you just got to back out and wait.
Yep. Yeah, if you are not able to overcome their senses, you will not win.
Yeah.
Not on a basis enough where you can count on it.
Well, I'm sure that the listeners and the viewers are raising their hand like,
what about this situation?
Right. Yeah.
So I think we can go even farther there. That's one situation, or the bull won't come across to draw into your calls. There's a couple of reasons there why. Another one is if you are above an elk, you can see down really well.
Right.
And, you know, anybody who's hiked a mountain knows that looking up, you've got the brush right there, your visibility is limited.
Yeah.
But if you're up high looking down, you can see all the way down to the bottom of the drainage sometimes. And when an elk comes in to a setup, if they can get a vantage above you, they're going to feel safe.
Right.
But the problem is they're going to stand right there and wait to see something. So visually, they've got the advantage when they're above you, and they'll hang up at that 100 yards or 120 yards waiting until they can see something. And so getting them to come down a hill and into a setup, a lot of times they don't come in because they hang up again at that 100-yard mark. So another benefit of getting on that same level.
So the solution to that is possibly be at the same elevation on the hillside and
side hill,
and maybe then you've got a perpendicular thermal. Let's say it's in that late morning, it's 11 o'clock.
Yep.
Thermal's now going uphill.
Yep.
You would try to get at the same elevation as them, get close enough. You know you don't have a perfect wind in your face, but at least you've got a wind going uphill.
So, and honestly, you just stole my thunder.
Oh, really? I'm sorry. I'm trying to walk this through.
That's
for
the golden
listener.
ticket of moving in at the same elevation or side hill to an elk is you don't have the wind in your face, but I would much rather, I think a wind at perpendicular 90-degree angle to your moving pattern is far better than a wind at your face. And the reason why is if you have a wind at your face, if it switches, if cloud cover comes over, if you're at that diurnal change where the wind goes from downhill to uphill, it changes 180 degrees. And if you've got a perfect wind in your face in the morning as you're moving up the hill, right below the elk, right behind them, they're going to bed and you're following them up the mountain, everything's good. When the wind switches, it blows straight at them.
Straight to them.
So if you can get on a parallel ridge and follow them and get side hill from them and move across, if wind switches, it doesn't foul you up. It doesn't give them a physical disadvantage, and it doesn't give them a visual advantage. So all of a sudden, you've conquered three of the biggest things that an elk hangs up on simply by moving in from a side hill approach or setting up on a side hill path.
Yeah. Huh. All these are little tidbits. Can I take notes while you're talking here? I'm sure somebody is raising their hand saying, you know what? I hunt flatter country. I hunt eastern Montana. I hunt central Wyoming. I hunt the pinyon juniper flats of Arizona or New Mexico.
Yeah.
And there's none of these topography things of little draws or whatever. They're just out here, and I can't get them to come through the junipers. They stand back there 100 yards. I can hear them raking a juniper. I can maybe hear them walking, but I can't get them to come in.
And the other thing is the ground in a lot of those places is so rocky that they can hear you from 200 yards and know exactly. So if you're the shooter out in front and you're trying to move in and get set up, they already have a little bit of a idea of where you're at and that, hey, there's something else up here I need to be wary of. So it takes more just attention to how to get that elk to come in closer. Yeah. And maybe that means the caller and the shooter are farther apart. And you've got to pull that bull through an area where he's comfortable, where you have more cover as the shooter to get set up.
See, because as someone who rifle hunts a lot, when I'm, all right, there's a bull over there. Yeah, I'm trying to be quiet. But if I got to make ground, I'm not all that quiet because I got the advantage that if he's within 300 yards, I'm going to shoot him.
Yep.
Archery, he's going to, I mean, they probably hear me in rifle season, but they just kind of stand there like where they're assessing,
right?
Where's the danger? Where's the noise? Where's
my best approach to go in to feel protected with my senses and still get an eye on what I think is a really sweet sounding cow?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just takes, in every situation, it's going to be a little different, but it all comes down to the elk senses, making them feel comfortable without giving them a true advantage. And I mean, really, that's in any contest you do. You know, you want to make the opponent feel like they have the upper hand and then surprise them with the true advantage.
But they always have an advantage.
They do.
So other setup things as far as we're talking about the 2-man setup. Yeah. I hope, but we better say it just because there might be people who this is their first time at it. You always the caller and the shooter they don't necessarily get in a straight line where you connect 3 dots, the elk, the shooter, and the collar.
Right.
You got to account for which direction the wind is going to go. Because if all things being equal, the elk, to use his one sense of smell, is going to try to come in by
circle around on the downwind side.
Downwind.
Yeah.
So you want to have that shooter anticipating that.
Yep. And so I call it the arc. And you mentioned, if you draw an imaginary line from the collar to the elk, and if that elk was on a string, he would come in right on that imaginary line. Well, the wind is either going to be blowing perpendicularly up or down across that line if you're coming in from a side hill point.
Yep.
And he is going to circle whichever way the wind's blowing. So if it's midday and the wind's coming up, he's going to circle up above your setup to come in. And again, he's going to have a visual advantage. So he's going to feel protected by his sense of smell and his sense of sight. And he's going to feel comfortable coming in. So that bull is highly likely to come in. As the shooter set up out front, you've got to account for that. And if you stay down low on that straight imaginary line on the side hill, that bull's going to be above you, and he's probably going to smell you before he gets to the setup and into the shooting lane.
Yeah.
So you want to account for that and get up a little bit higher, like you mentioned, offset. So I just draw an imaginary arc. You have the straight line from the collar to the elk, and then you draw an imaginary arc uphill if the wind's blowing up, or downhill if the wind's blowing down, and as a shooter set up on that line. And it's, people say, how far? Should it be 60 yards off the straight line? Should it be 20 yards? Find that place where the bull's going to be most comfortable to come in. If there's a beautiful game trail that's 30 yards below, he's going to walk that.
Yeah.
And you just need to be set up below that game trail. If there's a great big wall of brush right there, he might be forced to go up even though he wants to go down, and it's going to be harder to convince him to come through. And we can talk when we get into calling about some things that we can do there to make him want to come in more. But all of these little factors, an obstacle that the elk has to come through where he loses his ability to protect himself with sight and sound. Now he's relying strictly on nose. He's probably not going to give up that direction and not circle downwind if he has to come through thick stuff.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind the ARC, A-R-C, it also stands for always remember concealment. Think about the 3 senses that an elk has. When you set up, make sure that he's going to be comfortable using those senses. And if he's not, whatever sense he's going to use, you have to take into account that sense and make sure you're overcoming it.
So a lot of times, we like to think, okay, we're going to draw this up on the whiteboard. Like, timeout in the basketball game. You're the basketball coach. You draw it all up, and this is how it's going to happen.
Yep.
Well, even if you and your partner are there drawing it up in the sand out on the elk hill, sometimes it doesn't go as expected. So the collar is there, and the shooter goes downwind. Let's say it's a downwind slope wind. They do the arc, but sometimes the bull just isn't cooperating. Yeah. He didn't read the plan. So, as a caller, are in this setup, are you doing things in your movement to try draw the bull past the shooter? Because it seems in my experience, that the caller can get by with a lot more movement, noise, and other stuff. Once that shooter is set up, you kind of want that person sitting still,
not moving,
not making any noise, because that elk since they're closer, that elk's going to detect them.
Yeah, that's your that's your advantage right there, is having that shooter out there completely undetected. So the second he starts moving around, the elk hears a branch break, he knows there's something there that's probably danger or potentially danger. So you don't want the shooter moving around. You don't want the shooter making that movement but on the flip side, if you're the shooter and you need to make movement to make something happen, if there's a lane that the bull's coming to and you need to get 10 yards closer to it to get a shot,
right? You
don't be timid. That's the time you've got to take a chance and get to it. But for the most part, I made a comment during the filming of The Linguist that Sitka put out, the film they put out last summer. When we were talking about calling, I just said the caller becomes the quarterback. And I don't know where that comment came from or anything, but as I said it, I thought, that sounds really cool. And that's really what it is. You've got to call the shots. You've got to be the one that takes charge and puts that bull in the lap, in the shooting lane for the shooter. And so, as a caller, sometimes I'm back there running 60 or 80 yards, either running away, running close to get the bull's attention, to pressure him, moving around the ridge to make him come up to the top of the ridge into a shooting lane to look down on the other side. And as a caller, you just have to know where the shooter's set up, what the bull's doing, and then make a plan and a play to pull it into that lane.
I think a lot of people think once you craft your plan, I'm the caller, I'm here, you're the shooter, you're there, and everyone just stays put. And the bull read the plan and he's supposed to walk by. Doesn't necessarily.
In an ideal situation, yes, but 90% of the time, it's not ideal, which is why success rates are at 10%, I think. So.
Are there other things in these setups? I mean, we could spend forever talking about this kind of stuff, but
a couple of key things I think that, you mentioned before, you always set up behind a tree, and I was the same way. Yeah. You want to hide from the elk. When the elk comes in, you don't want him to see you.
Right.
So the first thing you do is you get behind something. And you just eliminated 99% of your shooting lanes. So if you have only 1% of your shooting lanes open as an option, you have to hope the bull comes in from behind you and surprises you, and there's no longer an obstacle there. And now you've messed that up as well. So set up in front of obstacles, set up in front of a tree, set up in front of brush, in front of rock. If you have camouflage that breaks up your outline, which if you're wearing camouflage, it should be breaking up your outline, set up in front of something. Let the camouflage do its job. At that point, yes, you are exposed and elk are going to pick up on your movement. So you've got to make strategic moves, draw your bow at the right time, take a step at the right time. If the bull turns his head, if his eyes go behind a tree, he's not going to see you. But if his eyes are exposed and he's 30 yards away broadside, even if he's looking straight forward, they can see 270 degrees with their eyesight, with their eyes set on the side of their head. So even if you're 35 yards behind or 35 degrees behind that elk, you raise your bow to draw, he can see that even if he's looking straight away.
Yeah.
So keeping in mind that movement's the key there, strategic movement, draw your bow at the right time. That's important.
Probably the one thing I notice, and I watch this in other hunters, and this gets to my waterfowling days, is shade.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people try to set up out in the wide open of the sun. There's a tree there, or there's a brush there, and they are in full lit area. And maybe sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. It's just how the setup works and who's coming from where. But it just seems that the shade helps your camouflage work even more effectively when you set up.
Absolutely, especially when it comes to movement. And if you're out in the sun and you're exposed, your bow has metal on it. There's things that will reflect sunlight, and even clothing, it's not like it's reflective, but if there's a light color in that pattern, elk are going to pick up on that if it's illuminated by the sun. And so, like you mentioned, getting in the shade, if it's at all possible, is just going to camouflage you better.
Yeah. So setups as far as you've got this, let's say it's peak rut, and there's 12 cows, and you got 2-3 bulls, kind of. One guy owns them, for lack of a better term. The other one or two are like,
want to.
Yeah, boy, I can't wait till I'm Big Hank someday. Yeah. Any different setup when you have satellites versus a different setup when you have a solo bull versus when it's like the big dude, man, this is the one I've been waiting for.
Yeah.
Big differences in how you do your setups for any of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think so. If you've got a lot of bulls and one bull is running all the cows, the other bulls are going to be very easy to call in. They're going to be, just a cow call, and they will come running. A bugle, they want to come in and see if they might be able to size you up and take over the cow. Or if happens to be a lone cow there, a cow that got separated from the herd, they're going to be very interested in that and almost desperate, to where they'll drop their senses and come running in. So if you get in that environment where there are 2 or 3 bulls, one of the bulls is very dominant, he's controlling all the cows, those other 2 bulls are an easy target. And if you aren't focusing on a specific bull or a certain size bull, those are easy elk to call in.
Yeah.
And I love those situations because those bulls will come walking right in, their guards drop, they're just in that mindset of, we're in an elk frenzy here. There's another bugle or a cow call over here. There's elk around. They don't even stop to think about there could potentially be danger.
Yeah.
And I think for most of us, that's an ideal situation. I will shoot a mature 5-point who's a satellite bull, even though there's a nice 6-point run in the cows. I'm not going to be picky most of the time.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to say something about a hunt in Montana where that situation happened.
I'll let that rest.
But I think we can even go back to that hunt, and you could describe, what we did to set up there, and it probably falls into everything we've talked about. 2-point, getting down on the same level, waiting for the wind to be right, moving in close, all of these different things that are so important to the setup. And, I certainly wasn't following a script there, but it's almost natural at this point that provides the most effective setup.
Yeah. So, have you found that in pre-rut, like September 1st, your setups are different because of how the elk are just behaviorally slightly different than September 20th when it's a peak rut? Or do you just say, what, elk are elk all the time, and I just take into account the landscape and the wind and let it go?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the way that we set up and call elk, is that we don't have to change it based on situation. Yeah, there are little things that you have to tweak here and there. If a bull is really timid, you have to understand why. Is it early and he's just not fired up in the rut? Is it late and he's been pressured a lot? Are there predators in there? I mean, all of these different things will contribute to the attitude of the bull, and you might have to adjust slightly. But at the end of the day, the more comfortable you can make that bull coming into a setup, or the closer you can get to that bull to entice him to come into the setup, the better off you are. And it doesn't matter if it's early, if it's, pre-rut, peak rut, even after the rut, sometimes the same situation will work. And I think the real key to, as we transition into calling, the key to the setup is getting as close to the elk as you can.
Understand that, folks. Get as close to the elk as you can before you do your setup.
And I say that all the time, and without fail, I'll get 15 emails from people saying, well, I know you say to get as close as you can, but what are we talking here? Are we talking 40 yards? Are we talking 400 yards?
What are we talking?
Yeah, we're talking as close as you comfortably can. And I've had people before say, well, I was able to slip in and I got 45 yards from the bull and got all set up and called, and he got up and moved off. And my first thought is, you got 45 yards from the bull. Why didn't you just shoot him? There's no reason to call at that point. So you got too close for calling. But ideally, I think my goal is 100 to 120 yards. And it probably only happens 25% of the time. Most of the time we're operating in that 150 to 200 yard range.
Okay.
And that's just realistic with terrain in the areas we hunt. It's just harder to get that close, especially as a shooter, and keep that advantage of silence as you move in to get set up.
Yeah. So people hearing this, I'm sure one of the questions is, should I be calling or should I be bugling when we're in this setup?
So can we talk about calling now?
Well, we can. Well, before we get into calling mistakes, as I was walking the dog and letting her do her business out there, I'm thinking there are going to be so many comments.
Yeah.
Corey, this is the scenario.
Yep. Send them to us.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. It would be cool if we could take your general rules that you just kind of described there, knowing there's an exception to all the general rules.
Totally.
That if people sent the emails with the detail, and we'll grab them and try to get through
we won't be able to get to all of them, because I don't know about you, but that's probably this time of year one of the most common emails is, last year I was hunting this area and encountered this. Will I encounter it again? Or I had a bull here and he hung up. Do you know why? And like you said, these are general rules. Yes, they are the most effective ways I've found to hunt elk and call elk, but they're general.
Yeah.
And they don't work every time. You have to be able to adjust, slightly at least, and not be locked into that. You mentioned the caller and the shooter plopping down in a certain place and staying there. If that bull's not coming, or if he's coming a different direction, you've got to be dynamic and get up and move, and you've got to adjust for it. So
yeah. Well, I think we've just kind of scratched
that.
Yeah, there's still a big itch there to be scratched, I think, as it relates to.
Yeah, so go to elktalkpodcast.com. Just go to the contact form. We've got a comments area there. You can send us an email, and we'll filter through them and try to come up with some situation-specific topics to talk about.
Yeah. So we're going to go into calling. And before we turned on the mic, we were talking about the opinions of everybody who's considered an elk hunting expert. They all have their own opinions about calling. And I say, if you hear it on this podcast, it's the right opinion.
Oh, it's not even an opinion. It's a fact.
There
it's
you
a fact
go.
on this podcast.
So, and this is not.
And we say that for those listening, that's very tongue-in-cheek.
That is very much tongue-in-cheek.
We absolutely understand that our methods and styles and opinions might not match up and might not be the best way or the only way. Yeah. This is what works for us, and we want to share it.
So I'm thumbing through my Bugle magazine, which you get by being a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
Which issue is that?
This is the July-August of 2018.
New. Okay.
And you pointed out to me that, hey, you ought to go read this article. There's some differences in how people approach calling or what they think of calling. Really, I was distracted by this ad over here. It says official elk call, Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls, official elk call of RMEF.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Chuck Adams, who's shot more than his share of elk, he gave his opinion.
Big elk.
Yeah, big elk. He gave his opinion about it, and I'm going to read it. And this is, Chuck's a great hunter, and he's accomplished a lot of things, but I'm doing this for the sake of people to understand that if you ask 50 hunters their opinion about calling, you're going to get 150 variations of different answers.
All the way from zero tolerance to me running my mouth continually with an elk calder in September.
So here's what Chuck says, and I'm partway through the article here. It says, think before you call. As I've discussed before in this column, many elk archers call too much with unrealistic expectations. The super success enjoyed on promotional videos and TV shows by bow hunters, hawking diaphragms, grunt tubes, and calls might seem astonishing. But you should know that much of the success is filmed on game farms or in lightly hunted private ground. If you try the same raucous calling on public land, the only thing that you're likely to encounter is a deafening silence or other hunters. Modern elk can recognize fake calls from hundreds of yards away. Sure, a younger rut-crazed bull might even run into your call, but not very often. Even if your well-practiced calls sound great, it is painfully easy to call too much and call too close to a bull. Real herd bulls usually space their bugles or grunts at least 5 to 10 minutes apart, often even less frequently. And when pressed at less than 100 yards, these hunter-shy creatures usually drift away. Most really successful bow hunters I know bugle from a distance to locate bulls, then shut up and rely on limb-raking cow calls and widely spaced bugles or grunt only as a last resort if they cannot silently sneak in on the elk. In my experience, you will get more and better shots at elk if the animals never know you are in the neighborhood. And so we joked and said that our opinions are the right opinions, but the point of it is everyone's hunting experiences bring them to a different conclusion about calling. Calling is something you excel at.
I don't know if I excel at it. I absolutely love it.
Okay. Whatever
we'll
term
go with
we
that
want.
for now.
However we want to say that. And so I didn't bring that up to say Chuck's wrong or Chuck's right or whatever. It's just he said, in my experience. That's what he said.
And Chuck is a great guy. And I've met him. I hung out with him. Absolute wealth of knowledge, and the things that he has done for archery and bow hunting is unparalleled. But I disagree with him pretty strongly there. And I preface it with that because he was pretty bold in a couple of his statements there. And he said something to the effect of real herd bulls only bugle every 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or he said something about the real successful bow hunters I know call very little.
Yeah.
Those are some pretty bold statements.
Yeah.
And I think in some areas, open country of Montana, you're not going to call a bull from 600 yards away with very sparse cover.
Right.
And you aren't going to be able to get closer to them other than spot and stalk. And if you give up your location, they're going to be watching and they're going to be hung up there and it's stalemate. So in certain terrains and for certain hunting styles, absolutely he's right. But to say that most really successful bow hunters I know only kill elk by spot and stalk and call very little, I would definitely challenge that. Now, with that being said, if you are targeting a 400-inch bull, it is true that by the time the peak rut kicks in, calling in a mature bull like that that's been around for 9 or 10 or 11 seasons, that has an established harem of cows, that his only purpose for being with them is to breed and then leave, that is a very hard target to call in. There is no doubt. But there might be 6 bulls around there that are 320 to 360 that are now satellite bulls that I will raise my hand first every time if somebody says, would you shoot one of these satellite bulls? So if that's the case, if you were targeting a specific bull, which Chuck Adams, I think, has killed 2 world record Rocky Mountain elk with a bow.
Right.
He's obviously targeting a trophy animal, a specific size, age class animal, and calling might not be the most effective way to hunt that particular animal. I would counter and challenge to say that you can be more successful calling an elk if you do it the right way than trying to spot and stalk one for 90% of the hunters out there. And, I was talking to my 11-year-old, and he was just saying, I really want to shoot an elk this year. And I told him, you've got to shoot your bow a lot. He said, why would I want to archery hunt? That's harder. For me, it's not. For me, archery hunting elk is easier than rifle hunting elk. And it's because they call. And I think they're a much more susceptible target because of that fact. So, again, with the utmost respect for Chuck Adams, I would disagree with some of his opinion on calling.
So, with that, and that part of the exercise was to let people know that if you're listening to this and you've got your opinions on calling, they're not wrong.
Exactly.
Your hunting experiences have brought you to these opinions and these perspectives.
And if you don't have an opinion about it yet, listen to ours because it's the right one.
All right, we're here to win the election. We're here to dominate. We want this opinion to be the opinion accepted universally across the elk hunting world.
That's right.
All right.
So even going a step farther with that, there are 5 or 6 other individuals that come to mind that have an opinion on calling. And they call a lot and they call very effectively, but their calling style differs from mine. They're not wrong.
Right.
I'm not right. This is just what works for us. And I think for the listeners, if you can glean something from what we're sharing about calling, and it's an aggressive style of calling. It's a in-your-face, fast and furious. There's nothing more exciting. But if you can glean something from that and take away something from what Chuck says about listening to bugles and shadowing the herd, spotting and stalking from there, or keeping the animal just talking as you move in closer. If you listen to someone else who has a different style of calling and uses a different approach and maybe breaks down the sounds of the elk into several different categories of communication. Take what makes sense to you there. Take what makes sense from what we're saying, put them together into your own style of hunting, and go and hunt elk and call elk or do whatever you want to do to be effective there. That creates your hunting style and makes you the hunter you are. And that's all we're trying to do. We aren't trying to say you have to hunt just like us, and if you don't, you're on a different team. There's no teams here. We're just trying to make you successful on your team.
So, that all said,
that was a big disclaimer.
that was a big disclaimer, but that's all right. And I'm going to just pick some of the points Chuck brought up about how often a herd bull calls. Every 5 to 10 minutes. You call. I've hunted with you. You call a lot. We've been into groups where here's the guy who owns the cows. He's calling every 45 seconds. If you get him wound up, you and him are having a heck of a conversation.
And I think that comes down to terrain a lot. I know where Chuck hunts is a lot of the more open country, where it's more conducive to spotting the animal and spending hours moving in to get in close and get in position to get a shot. And in those cases, the same reason that you can't call effectively is the same reason that the bulls don't need to call a lot. They are able to visually keep track of the cows. They can establish dominance over another bull simply by seeing the other bull. Whereas the areas that I prefer to hunt are thicker timber, where the elk are going to be more vocal because they're talking to each other. They might not be able to see each other until they're within 30 or 40 yards. And so they're using their vocal communication to build up to that encounter.
So You're very aggressive caller. I've hunted with a lot of people. You're definitely on the spectrum of passive to aggressive. You're redlined over here on aggressive. And you're proud of that, and you should be. And it's a ton of fun.
It is.
It is. It's just a lot of fun, even though it's exerting to keep up with you as you're just going, here, call, here, call, here, call. You're not
That's just in the locating phase.
Right. So, which gets me to where I'm going with that is, you don't just walk through the woods and wait until you hear an elk and say, "Oh, there's one." You're trying to coax these bulls into saying, "Hey, I'm over here.
Yep.
Want to play?"
Yeah.
Is that kind of like the very first step?
It is, and I think it's a vital step, because if you want to call in an elk, you have to find an elk that's calling. And there's no other way to say it. I mean, yes, you might get a silent bull to come slipping in cautiously to check you out in a blind calling setup, and we'll use those early seasons sometimes. But for the most part, if you want that vocal interaction with an aggressive bull that is coming in to rip your head off, which is what makes the situation fun, you've got to find that bull. And you've got to get him talking. And there are times that there will be a bull that is just tight-lipped for whatever reason, but there are ways to get him to talk. And there are, a handful of methods. In the University of Elk Hunting online course, there's a full chapter on, I forget what we call it, but some supplements to calling. And a lot of it revolves around just getting an elk to be vocal. Yeah. And you've got to get an elk to be vocal to use my calling style effectively. Okay. There's just, it has to happen. He has to talk in order for me to be able to execute.
Yeah. So we would leave camp way before daylight, and in the dark you're calling.
Yep.
And we're making notes on our GPS. That's part of your process there.
Sometimes, yeah, definitely. And a lot of times it's just to find the bull that is hot that day.
Okay.
And that might mean we bugle 6 times and the bull responds once, and I say, you know what, he's not fired up right now. Let's go pick a different drainage to hunt this morning and come back this evening and see, or come back after the morning hunt and see if we can get him going midday. And that might mean turning around, hiking a half mile back up the ridge to the truck, which is where you usually roll your eyes and shake your head at me. And you're like, there's a bull bugling over here. We just spent 20 minutes getting to this point. Now you want to turn around and go back to the truck and drive 6 miles down the road to try another drainage?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, but
you've got to find the bull that's fired up that day. And I don't know what turns them on from day to day, but some days bulls don't want to play, and the next day or another day, that same bull does.
Yeah. Well, the very first step that from my observation of hunting with you, is you are looking for, like you just said, the guy who wants to play.
Yep.
Now you found the guy who wants to play. I think you take for granted how much information you are filtering the first couple times you communicate with this bull.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, Corey, what did you just say? Oh, I don't know. I think you know what you're at least making some assumptions in your head of what's going on here. He's aggressive, or he's defending his cows, or he's in his bed, or he's whatever.
Yeah.
Is that something that just came from experience? Are there certain things that this bull behaved a certain way where I know that's what he's doing?
Yeah, and it's generalized. And it's hard to, I think experience definitely helps. But at the same time, if you have to call 5 or 6 times with a location bugle from 600 yards away to get that bull to respond each time, and each time he does, it's just a half-hearted squeal or just a couple chuckles or just a growl or something down there, yeah, he's responding, but he's not fired up. He's not just running his mouth, which is the elk I want. I want an elk that's down there just thinking, today's my day to die. I'm going to run into anything. And that's how I'm reading it. He's down there saying, I am feeling it today, and I'm going to be king of this mountain today.
Yeah.
And if I can get a bull that's thinking he's pretty hot stuff on the mountain, that's the bull that I want to call in.
Okay.
Because he's going to be susceptible to wanting to come into a fight.
So we ran into some of those.
Yeah.
And then you grabbed another gear, and you were going even faster to close the gap, because sometimes they were half mile, 3/4 mile away.
Yeah.
And you were like, we gotta go. And you were cutting that distance by you were getting within 200 yards with a lot of times not even calling again.
Yeah.
Just I don't know how you were assessing it, but
Yeah.
you'd go long distances without calling, and you'd just be listening, and off we'd go. You'd listen, off we'd go.
Totally. And if that bull is making noises on his own, if he's bugling on his own, I will keep going in until I can get as close as I possibly can, just based on him talking. Usually that's not the case. Typically he's standing there listening going, is he going to talk again? He may not be keyed in that, hey, we're coming to him, but he now knows there's another elk on the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 minutes later, he might bugle and say, hey, where'd you go? Or he might be standing there going, I just heard a branch break. I wonder if that's, a grizzly bear or that other bull. And so hunting in areas where there's predators, they're probably not going to be as vocal on their own. You get in the peak rut, they're going to be far more vocal on their own, but again, harder to call in. So it's just all these different dynamics that you kind of have to filter through of what's the timing of the rut. Are there predators in the area? Are there other hunters? Have they been pressured? Is it early? Is it late? Does he have cows? Does he not have cows? Are there a lot of bulls in the area? High bull to cow ratio? All these things that, I'm trying to filter in and really read the psyche of that elk and get inside his mind and think, what's he thinking right now?
So you realize how many things you just rambled
I know,
off.
and there could be a podcast on each one of them.
Yeah, that you said, I'm trying to filter all this.
Yeah.
The listener, me, and the listeners are like, well, that's great, Corey, but tell me about all those things. So I hope the listeners will email us and say, all right, smart Alex, you rambled off all these things. I'm here to learn.
So maybe what we need to come up with is like a decision tree.
There you go.
We're sitting here are the 10 factors that I'm filtering through. If it's early season, if the bull doesn't have cows but he's a mature bull, if the wind's coming uphill, if he's 600 yards away, yes, it filters down to this is the next step. And I think there really is probably a decision tree like that goes on in my head that I just haven't actually diagrammed out.
Maybe we need to build an app.
They're right there in the mountains. Yes, check, submit. All right, here's the next play.
So the way we got into this is you did not finish this in the last podcast and that podcast was about mistakes.
Yep.
So we're on the topic of calling.
Yep.
We've started down some trails, some paths here that I'm sure in the next podcasts of however many, we're going to cover more of this stuff. Calling mistakes.
Yep. I think with what I've said, it leads to a couple primary mistakes. Number one, people hear an elk bugle, they drop their pack, they kneel down, they get set up right there at 400 yards away.
Yeah, and they think it's going to come in.
And I know I was guilty of it for a long time. I let out a bugle from 400 yards away. The bull answers. I wait 60 seconds. I let out another bugle, the same bugle. The bull answers. I wait 60 seconds. And we do that for 15 minutes. And then the bull slowly turns and walks over the ridge away from me. I think, oh, he's got cows, and he's a herd bull, and he's bugling and running, which you hear everybody talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the number one mistake is we hear an elk bugle, and we instantly drop down in that scenario, in that situation, and try to call that bull in. And there's so much more that needs to happen before that. The second thing is we don't know what to say or when to say it. Mm-hmm. And so we get into a situation where we're close to the elk now, but we're just in that bugling match where it just goes back and forth. We're just volleying communication, and we don't know what we're saying, and we don't know what we need to say to get that bull to come in.
Yeah, that's why I asked you. Yeah. What did you just say?
And my dad he's the one I credit for giving me that, I don't know, I guess the big picture, stepping back. Instead of saying, you're a great caller and you sound just like an elk, but you suck at calling elk in. That's really what was going on in his mind, I know. Uh-huh. He said, what are you even trying to tell the elk? And it made me stop and think, well, I'm just trying to tell them that I'm calling and they need to come in, but they have to have a reason to come in. And I think through the years, I've realized there's not really very many reasons that an elk's going to come into your calls.
What are those reasons?
There's only two that I think of, and and it's natural. It's an instinct for them. They either want to fight the bull because they think that they need to establish dominance, or that they're a more dominant bull, or this bull has cows that they need to go in and steal. So the fight, or there's a cow there that they want to breed.
Flirting.
Yeah. And if you can convince them that you're a cow that's lonely, that they have a chance of hooking up with, they're going to come in.
Yeah.
If you convince them that you're a bull and that you're challenging them to fight and they have some chance of beating you in that fight or some reward for beating you in that fight, they're going to come in. Outside of that, an elk has no reason to come to your calls.
So it sounds like he was those elk are like I was when I was in college
I use that analogy
20 years
all the
old.
time.
I'm like, oh, there's some over there. Well, there's a pretty big guy. I got those ones. No, I don't care.
Yep.
Walk in there, get a few teeth shook loose. Oh, that wasn't a good idea.
Sorry,
every once in a while, though, he wasn't the one piping up to attract me. It was one of the, it was like, man, I'd like to dance with her.
Yep.
And, whoa.
And as we graduate from this topic of elk calling mistakes into actual elk calling tactics, which I'm looking here and we're at 1 hour and 6 minutes. So our listeners are out of patience right now and the treadmill is shut off and he's standing there wiping the sweat off of his forehead. So we can't get into that. But when we get into that, I'm going to bring up your exact example of when you were 20 years old. Because if you will treat elk hunting and think of it from that same perspective, elk, they have that fight or flight. They have a rush of adrenaline and testosterone that they can't control. And when you think about anything you could do to either convince a girl or to convince a guy to fight you, convince a girl to come to you or a guy to fight you in college, the exact same approach is going to work for calling elk.
Really?
Yep.
I wasn't really good at getting the girls to come to me, but I was really good at getting the guy mad enough to come and fight me.
And maybe that's why I'm so effective at calling in bulls that want to fight. Because I was probably that mouthy, obnoxious person that pushed the right buttons.
I got a few scars here to prove that I've opened my mouth. But I do an inventory. I still have all my teeth, so perfect. That works. But anyhow, to these mistakes, it's that
calling mistakes. It's not being. The setup initially, you need to be close. So I think too many people start off too far away, not knowing what to say or how to say it or when to say it. And again, I simplify everything. Mm-hmm. I'm an engineer. I don't know if that's why. I don't know if it's my mentality. I look for the easy way. I don't know, but I know I simplify things. If I look at 3 ways to do it, my first thought is, what's going to be the most effective way? Mm-hmm. And then which one's the most simple way? Yeah. And if it's not the same, I take the most effective way and simplify it to make it simple. And when it comes to calling, that's the approach I take. It's very simple. Mm-hmm. And I want it to be simple because I make enough mistakes in simplicity. Yeah. And if it's complicated, I will mistake myself out of any chance of success.
Yeah. Well, for me, what happens is I don't know enough about what I'm saying. And so I easily get flustered. I easily lose my confidence of what I've done. And you kind of throw your hands up in the air just because of lack of knowledge and understanding of, all right, back to your point or your dad's point of what am I doing to get that elk to come in?
Yeah.
Just trying to sound like him isn't going to necessarily get him to come in. Trying to sound like the classic drawn out bugle isn't necessarily going to get him to come in. There's got to be a purpose with what I'm doing.
Totally.
And part of that, and this has taken me a long time. I mean, I'm still such a novice at it, but every time I make these incremental little steps in my knowledge, it's because I've stopped and thought about, why am I doing this? Why? Yep. I'm not going to impress anybody, so why? What am I trying to accomplish here? And a lot of it is trying to understand and listen to what they're saying. And I don't know what they're saying, but I've been around elk enough that I can kind of tell what their behavior is by their noise, by how loud, the volume, the pitch, how frequent. Maybe I'm hearing a really loud bugle here, but I'm also hearing a bunch of cow calling. Yep. There's so many things that are going on out there that you really got to be paying attention to, or you're missing some of the pieces of the puzzle.
And I think that you nailed it right there. That's bow hunting. That's elk hunting in a nutshell. If you aren't paying attention to what happened and trying to analyze why did that happen, you're not learning. I mean, you really aren't. And you mentioned two words that I think are so critical: knowledge and confidence. And I really think we had a t-shirt at one point that said confidence equals success. And confidence comes from knowledge.
Right.
So
for sure.
You start with knowledge and add as much knowledge as you can. You're going to be more confident in that. No matter what the topic is, the more knowledge you have about something, the more confident you are to execute on that topic.
Yeah.
And with that confidence comes success. So it all begins with knowledge and just trying to learn as much as you can. So when a mistake happens, you're able to analyze it and assess it and say, okay, this just happened. Why? There's always a why. There is always a why in elk hunting.
Always.
And if you try to not overly complicate it, and remember, this is an elk you're dealing with, not a scientist at NASA or something, the why is a little bit easier to attain. And then it's totally up to you to adjust to that why and make the correction as needed.
Yeah. When you were talking about confidence, knowledge in that equation, for me, and it goes back to a comment you made earlier about how you feel way more confident you're going to hang your tag on an animal in archery season.
Yeah.
Me, because my greatest amount of knowledge is in post-rut and late seasons. My knowledge base there, not that it's huge, but if you looked at my pie of knowledge base, it's heavily weighted towards those periods.
Yeah.
So I will continue to do some things that, even though they're maybe not showing the results, my knowledge gives me enough confidence to keep doing it.
Yep.
Or doing this or adapting slightly, and I end up being successful.
Yep.
And it goes back to what you said. My knowledge about what elk do at that time of year is my greatest strength. And that gives me the confidence to go do things where people might be like, what in the heck is he doing? But
and again, that's what it comes down to, is doing the thing that you're confident in and having enough encounters or enough opportunities to know that you're going to be successful, because it's not going to happen the first time every time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, you're going to go out and do things that people look at and say, why are you doing that? And you're going to do it and eventually be successful. And hopefully that eventually happens before the season ends and before your days of that hunt end. Yeah. And for me, it's the same way. If I can get 6 call-ins, if I can get 6 elk that I think are committed call-ins, I'm pretty confident we can fill a tag.
Yeah.
And there was a point where I would have far more call-ins than that in a season and not even get close to getting a shot.
Really?
And so it's just a matter of continually fine-tuning and honing in on that process and that sequence or strategy that you use, your style of hunting that makes you effective.
Uh-huh. In just about every one of these podcasts, you're going to hear me talk about the tendency I had to not invest in my knowledge.
Yeah.
Buy some shortcut of buying a new rifle, buying a new bow, buying a new call. Don't get me wrong. There's always plenty of good reasons to buy new bows and rifles and calls. I'm not trying to discourage anyone there, but eventually you reach the point where you understand that I have to invest in myself.
Yep.
I have to invest in my knowledge, my understanding of what is that elk trying to do. He's trying to stay alive today. And he's going to go to bed tonight and he's going to wake up tomorrow and he's going to try to stay alive tomorrow.
Yep.
In its most basic fundamental formula, that is what an elk is trying to do every day, every minute. He's trying to stay alive.
Absolutely.
And it required me to understand and learn more about, okay, what does he do each day to stay alive? What's their behavior? What are their needs? What's going on in that elk's life? And the more I learned about elk, all of a sudden you start filling more tags. I quit buying gadgets and gizmos and started filling more tags. So.
Yeah. Well, we did a survey. I don't remember if I mentioned it in the last podcast, but at Elk 101, a broad survey to a lot of elk hunters, and the most successful hunters in that survey said that knowledge and experience were the number one factor that led to their consistent success.
Yeah.
And they were the only group interviewed or surveyed that put that as number one, either number one that would lead to success or that they needed to improve upon to become more consistent. No other group mentioned it but the consistently successful group. And they recognize that it's their knowledge and experience that contribute to their success.
Yeah. So, is that enough on elk calling mistakes?
That's probably enough on mistakes, but man,
okay.
I'm all worked up now. I want to talk about elk calling.
All right. Well, let's not just slow down. I mean,
we don't have another hour here. We probably better do it in another episode.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Since you already got the crowd, they're probably right now on their phone saying, Corey, this is what happened. I did what you do, and it didn't work.
Yep.
That's we got to just kind of stay down this path so that they understand what worked or what didn't work, because you've never called or never heard an elk bugle that you didn't kill, right?
I've never heard an elk bugle that I didn't want to chase.
There you go. That's a better way to put it.
There have been multiple ones that I didn't kill, more than I can even count, and and that's what we are by no means professional. We are by no means what I would consider highly effective.
No.
We just keep going and persevere, and
that's the fun part of it. I think if I had success every time I went out there, I'd get bored with it.
It would.
I'd quit learning. The challenge, the intrigue would go away. But there are times when I go through these dry spells where it's like, I could use a little success here to kind of throw me a bone, But oh well. Well, folks, thanks for listening. We got a list of other things here. Corey he brought calls, he brought everything to Montana. So we got to have some podcast where you do some calling.
Yeah.
Was that the plan?
I hope so.
On the next one?
Yeah. Maybe not the next one, but at some point I'd love to at least see if we can peek out the audio sensors here on the equipment.
Oh, I'm sure we can. I mean, that's what we have editors for.
Good luck working with this one. No, we're here. We're going to record at least one more, I think. And then we're going to the Total Archery Challenge in Big Sky this weekend, and going to hopefully sit down with a few other people and discuss a few other topics.
Yeah, but before we do that, I got to talk about this project. We're getting a lot of good nuggets out of Bugle Magazine here.
There are nuggets there.
Yeah. So I don't know if people understand that their $35 membership or whatever level of membership or their volunteerism goes to these kind of projects. Yep. But this one, if you hunt the San Luis Valley in kind of south central Colorado, down by Alamosa area. I don't want to get too specific because it'll get run. But when this project came up, I was aware of it and I heard about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, what kind of deal? That would be like classic. So it's called Middle Creek. And what it is there was this BLM road that went up this drainage and then it crossed private. And there's all this beautiful elk country back there, but it hits private.
And there's no easement through private land on that piece.
So this Middle Creek project, the Elk Foundation bought 24 acres, and it secured and permanently improved the access to another 8,500 acres. So that's pretty good bang for
I don't know.
buck.
Does it say in the article what they spent on the 24 acres?
No, it doesn't. But
I was just looking at that. If you're into investing or anything like that, and you look at if I spend 24 acres and receive 8,500 acres, that's a good investment.
That's someone at your lands group is doing a pretty darn good job.
And you look at the mission of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and realize that the monies that you're spending as a member or going to a banquet and supporting in that way, that money goes back on the ground. And I forget the percentage, but they are one of the leading organizations, and they show what goes where.
Yeah.
And it's in the 90%.
Yeah, it's plus or minus right there at 90%. There's a group called Charity Navigator that rates charities.
Yep.
And the Elk Foundation is always getting, I think it's 5 stars or whatever it is. Great thing. But when we do these podcasts, I want to make sure people understand these are just, by the time we're done doing podcasts and they send us off to the pasture, people are going to hear about so many amazing elk projects in some of them are in their backyards.
Yep.
And hopefully they understand that because of donors, sponsors, volunteers, great staff that the Elk Foundation has, that becomes very, very possible.
Yeah.
So,
And it's not the day of sitting back and letting somebody else be the member and contribute is over.
Yeah,
we have
done.
to band together as elk hunters and as hunters in general, and even there's wider groups that we can look at. But when it comes to elk hunting and preserving their habitat and the animals that we love to chase, there is no one like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation that is putting dollars on the ground. In that case, 24 acres they purchased. They
Right.
own 24 acres of land.
Right.
That they used to open up 8,500 acres of public land that was already there but locked up.
Right.
And they didn't have to go and buy that 8,500 acres of land and use that much money to gain all of us access to that. That's huge. And those kind of things are things we need to step back and look at as elk hunters and say, I want to support an organization like that.
Yeah. And that 24 acres, then they gave it to the federal agency to say, you manage it. We don't.
Yeah.
And we're not in the business of owning and managing lands. So, question of the week from Sitka. This one's going to be pretty, I hope it's simple. But whenever you ask an elk calling nut a question about calls, I get this question all the time. I've got it a couple times in the last week is, do you prefer a diaphragm call or an open reed call or a bugle with the built-in reed? I know what your answer is going to be, I think. But pluses and minuses of each?
Yeah, and there are. So the three styles you mentioned, there's a diaphragm call, which goes entirely in your mouth, and then you use a tube to amplify it. The tube also acts to help scale, help with the back pressure, help the diaphragm operate. So it's not just a volume thing. The tube's really an important part of that system. The other option is an open reed, which is primarily a cow call. So it's got a soundboard with an open reed that you blow across, and that vibration produces a cow sound. And the benefit of that is for somebody who can't use a diaphragm call, the open reed call still gets you a very realistic sound. It's more than just one-dimensional. You can get a little bit of variation in it, so it's a good option. The third option is the system where it's an external call. You basically blow on it, it produces the sound, but they're so one-dimensional. You basically have the same sound over and over. You can't chuckle with it. You can't get the emotion into it. But if you can't use a diaphragm call, that's really your only option. But hands down, the best way to go is to spend time and learn to use a diaphragm for several reasons. Number one, it's the most realistic call that you're going to use. You're going to be able to make any sound with it. It's going to sound the most like an elk. The second thing is, if you're a bow hunter, it's important to have a call that's hand-free.
Yeah.
You know, if you're at full draw on an elk and he walks into your shooting lane, I remember hunting with you in New Mexico, and we had a bull walk through a shooting lane, and if I remember right, you didn't have a call in. And so I think you tried to whistle.
Mistake.
I think you tried to whistle at it, and your lips were dry, and so it came out more of a And by the time you got the whistle, the bull had walked through the shooting lane. So as a shooter, having a diaphragm in your mouth so you can be at full draw and cow call to stop the bull is so important. If you're using an open reed cow call and you're trying to put it in your mouth and cow call with it while you're at full draw, there's a train wreck and possibly a trip to the hospital that's going to ensue. So diaphragm calls are absolutely the way to go. They're the hardest one to learn to use. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, it goes back to that putting time in, investing in yourself, investing in learning how to use and operate a diaphragm call confidently is going to pay off huge dividends for years to come.
Yeah. Well, that's the Sitka question of the week. Thanks for answering it. I wish we would have had the camera rolling when I walked up to Corey very sheepishly. I knew the mistake. It's like, oh, I can't believe I didn't have my diaphragm in my mouth. And I walk up to Corey and he's like, why didn't you shoot? I'm like, I couldn't get him stopped. He said, I didn't hear you call. I'm like, I was trying to think of some good excuse because I know what an amateur rookie mistake that was. So I just kind of looked down, kicked the dirt, and said, I didn't have my diaphragm in my mouth.
I think when you caught up to me about 3 miles later and I finally talked to you again, I made sure you had a diaphragm still in your mouth.
Yeah, that was... Yeah.
I'm excited to get Dirk Durham on the podcast with us because he could probably share a few experiences like that. I've thrown him under the bus a lot. I think he's probably primed and ripe to throw me under the bus a little.
Oh, that's good. We need some of that. So, folks, as you're listening to this podcast, we're trying to be what I will call seasonally appropriate in the content.
Yeah.
Like right now, everyone's thinking about archery season.
The rut's coming up.
Yeah. So as we get through archery season, we'll start shifting more to rifle hunting and other things. And after all the seasons are done, we'll probably start talking about equipment and gear and tag applications.
I was just going to say,
all
where are we
kinds
going
of
to hunt?
So I think we got a wrap here.
Yep.
Thanks for listening, folks. Appreciate it. Till the next time, go and have a lot of fun. Go shoot your bow.
Yeah. And practice your diaphragm elk calls.